Hi! So I'm doing 2 videos in one day because I got nothing else to do. So I've mentioned before, I think, let me just kind of straighten that out a little bit. I mentioned before, I think, in past videos that paganism and New Age religion in general is just a very individualistic religion, I think. Certainly there are certain, subsects, like Gardnerian Wicca and maybe other traditional covens and things like that that are a bit more group-like, that have a more of a creed or a set of rules or whatever you want to call it, to go along with it, that makes the individuals within it be a little bit more streamlined or have similar thought processes. But I think you'll still find within those groups that the individuals within it, once they leave the circle, go back and they still retain their very individual beliefs about the way that the world works and things like that. Whereas I think other modern religions are a bit more assimilated. Certainly Western religions are a little bit more assimilated. Christianity, Islam, things like that. And obviously, just because people everywhere are individuals, there's going to be some give and take. In Christianity, there's Baptists and Catholics and all these different subsects within that as well. But this belief in, like one God, this belief that you can't worship other gods, things like that, it's pretty straight across the board with it. Whereas I think, like in Hinduism, I just watched a really interesting video by Annika Garrett about that, touched upon this a little bit. She was talking about how if Christianity hadn't reached, Europe, and if Europeans had kept their original pagan polytheistic beliefs, how it might come about in modern day. And she thought that it would be really similar to how Hinduism is, where polytheism is still alive and well, but there are so many different variations of it. It's really just exploded into a multifaceted, multi-expressions type of religion, which I think is awesome. I mean, that's my favorite thing about paganism is just how individualized it can be and how personal it could be. And I think that's really kind of the secret of the future in a lot of ways. Certainly some people will disagree with me on that, but I think allowing people to have their own individual ideas and then allowing yourself to appreciate other people's individual ideas for what they are and try to learn from them, or at least listen to them, respectfully, I think that's the goal. And so, I mean, what I wanted to talk about with this specifically is that I think the reason why that individualism within paganism is so important right now is because there are so many different people within the Western world, at least, because I come from the Western world, so I feel more comfortable talking about that. So many people from the Western world have lost their sense of individualism. They've lost their sense of culture and of tradition, especially, I think, if you are a white person, and this isn't a video to like say, like, why me? Why was I born white? I've lost my culture because of this and this and this, as if I have it so hard, because I don't. There's a lot of privilege that comes with being white. But if you look at the way that people who are white but come from different cultural backgrounds have, gone through history, there's a lot of assimilation there, and part of it is the privilege of being white, and so it's a lot less difficult for people, or it was a lot less difficult, or it was a lot more difficult, rather, for people during, the years when immigration was so prevalent from European countries due to famine and war, things like that. It was more difficult for people in the United States, for example, to tell if you were Irish instead of American or French instead of American, until maybe you opened your mouth and you had the accent. And so over the years, just as a way to survive, a lot of people who were white but came from European countries, and rather than face that discrimination, chose to instead even if it was subconsciously, to assimilate themselves by, not teaching their children how to speak their own language, or dropping some of the cultural traditions, maybe certain things that certain French people did during Christmas or whatever. That way they could kind of lessen that discrimination. And on one hand, that was great because it allowed them to survive and maybe, work their way up in the world. But on the other hand, some really beautiful traditions and beliefs and ways to identify yourself were lost. And I think that nowadays you see a lot of white people who, everyone in the United States, if you're white, you probably come from a Christian family. You're probably middle class. You celebrate Christmas pretty much the same way. Like it's very straight across the board. And I think the same thing has happened in a different way to some of to other races of people. It all comes from white people in regards to that, where when white people started to enslave other people, they would assimilate them as much as they can, or as much as they could, into white culture. That means Native Americans, they were forced to stop worshiping their gods and following their traditions, and to start worshiping the Christian God and start following Christian traditions. And the same thing happened with Black people. And so much of their original culture's traditions were lost. And now you have people who are Black, for example, who really have no clue where their families came from, which countries they came from, and what sort of traditions were involved in those countries' culture. And so, yeah, it's just sad. So I think the great thing about paganism is that it is a going back to those original traditions, sorry. I'm Irish, I'm Swedish, German, French, a whole mess of different white people. And if it wasn't for paganism, I don't know, I have no traditions left over from that past, that heritage in my life to go back to. Paganism, I think, allows me to touch into that and to revert back to, at least a little bit, to the original way of the world, where there was a lot of white people in Europe, but they were all different because they dressed differently and they had different religions and they had different practices and things like that, which I think is just more beautiful. It's a more beautiful way to live our lives, I think, especially if you come into it with an accepting kind of mindset of understanding that no one can be proven right in regards to the way that we live our lives and the way that we identify deity. It all comes from a very intuitive place, from a very instinctual place. And if you allow yourself to experience these different ways of life and these different ways of identifying deity, while also accepting other people's experiences and their ways of identifying deity, then I think it's going to create a much more harmonized world. And I think it's going to allow us as individuals to learn even more about deity than we could even get from one specific culture that we're kind of going back to through paganism. And I think that's different from some Western religions, in that when you, as a Baptist, for example, because I used to be a Baptist, are intent on evangelizing and intent on trying to force people to assimilate into this very Baptist-specific way of thinking and of identifying God, you're losing out on a lot of other different perspectives, which are all equally valid and can offer you, even as a Christian, even if that's how you choose to remain to identify, it still has a chance of offering you a lot of different ideas about God that you can implement into your own religion, into your own perspective of who God is. So if you're intent on assimilating other people and of striking out individuality and difference, simply because you have this strong belief in evangelizing and of like saving people's souls, then I think you're ultimately losing out on a lot of really beautiful ideas about the way that the world works and that the universe works. Which, I mean, just based on our utter lack of proof of what God is, if God even exists, if it's goddess, or something that is just some kind of non-gender entity. I mean, there's no facts proving any of it, so it's all valid. It's all possible. And that's pretty much all I have to say about it. I think it just offers so much possibility in regards to that, in regards to finding yourself again, in regards to experiencing what the oppressor has tried to stamp out. You know, whether you are white, black, or whatever, there are certain things that the patriarchy really has attempted to make scarce in this world, and try to destroy. And through paganism, you have a chance to recreate those. It might not be exactly the same, but it's influenced by it. It's part of yourself, and it's really empowering because you are striking back a little bit. It's a little FU too. Like you couldn't erase it completely. It's still here. And I talk a lot about like the benefits for like white people, and I don't really want to stick with that because, like I said, white people have a lot of privilege in this world. It sucks that they lost their culture, or that we lost our culture. But you know, we also got a lot of privilege with that as well. But for people who are like people of color, it offers so many benefits too, especially if you are a person whose culture has been lost through slavery and other forms of oppression. Through paganism, you can get it back in a lot of ways. You can, you know, if you are someone whose family has come from a long line of slaves and you have no idea where you came from, you can get a DNA test. You can see which countries your family originally came from and research those countries, try to understand their beliefs, and you know, be influenced by them and try to implement them in your lives. And through that, you know, create a kind of revolutionary, rebellious act. And you know, it's like a protest in a lot of ways. So yeah, it's just very cool. I think it's hard to form in words because I think it offers so much for the future in regards to a sense of community, of relationship building, of understanding different ideas, of the give and take of different ideas. It's just, you know, instead of evangelizing and trying to create this kind of competition of us versus them, it's all of us, and all of us are individuals within this big conglomeration of different ideas and concepts. I think it has an appreciation of diversity already built into it. And I'm not going to get into this, but it's disappointing when you come across different pagans who don't have that appreciation for diversity, because I don't understand it. I don't get how you can come into this path of spirituality and come away with not having that deep appreciation for different people's different ideas. Especially when you are someone who, as a pagan, already experienced a level of discrimination that other religions, or some other religions, don't necessarily experience. You know, how dare you recreate that into our own community? And it makes me mad because it creates even more of a struggle for those of us who are trying to create this individualized world, who are trying to create this deep appreciation of diversity within our world and within our lives. But maybe that's another video. So I'm going to end it here. Thank you guys for listening to me. I hope you guys have a wonderful day.